I'm showing you how I plaster these small home projects so you can do it too. And I'm going to plaster this attic extension myself. It's mostly new plasterboard, and let's use this little wall as a starting point, as it's only about 5 square meters, a good size for the novice to start with. I'll start my countdown using my phone, which helps me keep on top of my plastering window. Get all your tools and buckets organised with the quantity of water you need for the entire mix. Get your plaster ready. I've prepped my wall with stop beads and scrim, and I've gone through how to get all of this right, along with the few tools and buckets you need. So see this video in the top left. Start the clock for our 2-hour plastering time window and get on with it. So we're gradually adding the first mix plaster, and this is 1/4 of a bag for our first coat, to the first quantity of water, which is 3 litres, which we've already added into the bucket whilst mixing. Time is the DIY plaster's enemy. From the minute the plaster hits the water and starts to set, so we need to be sure of getting the right quantity for our wall in advance. I'll pour half of the water into this baby 15 litre flexi bucket first, saving a tiny little bit for later if required. Tearing all along the top of the bag, I'll add the plaster, gently shaking it into the bucket to make it easier to mix and avoid lumps. Mixing like this prevents any plaster from sticking to the bottom of your bucket, whilst getting a decent mix to work with. I like the flexi bucket for beginners, since I think it's quicker to create a good mix due to its shape, and it's easy to manoeuvre. I'll put in a bit at a time as I mix, then pour, then mix. I'll periodically stop and use my bucket trowel to make sure there's no unmixed patches at the bottom where the paddle didn't catch. You won't have time to do this once you're plastering and the mix has started to cure. Both my buckets and tools need to be spotless, by the way. Back to my wall, we said around 6 litres of water gives the best consistency for a half bag of plaster, but it's dependent on room humidity and stuff, so look and feel comes into it. The old guy who taught me told me to get consistency like Angel Delight, if you remember that pudding we used to get. Then if the mix stays on your bucket trowel without sliding off when held level, whilst having that creamy look, you're ready to go. I mentioned trowel size in my last video, and I think I'm using a weathered Marshalltown 14-inch here. It's not a huge deal, but a 13-inch is maybe easier for the beginner. Size isn't everything, however, it's more about technique. And I always try to use my shoulder to lead the motion and push in rather than my wrist and forearm, as you'll tire and start making mistakes. But best ask a real plasterer about technique and trowel size. Start with a wall to practice, never a ceiling since it's harder above your head, and don't worry about mucking it up. Just pull it off the wall and start again. The plaster itself costs very little. Just have some strong polythene to roll down and just be prepared to pull it off the wall if it's your first time. Complete the first coat, aiming for a 1 to 2 millimeter spread evenly with smooth motion in a single direction whilst pressing into the wall. Ideally you want to start at the top. I'll go from left to right along the length, and then I'll go from bottom up in long sweeping motions, pushing the trowel whilst moving it at the same time at a very slight angle. It's a bit harder on this wall because I've got sockets and lights which I want to get first, plus it's a small area so it's not really that critical. I'm not in the least bit bothered about getting it perfect at this stage, but I am bothered about getting the entire wall covered as quickly and as evenly as possible, and that's where the bottom up motion really helps you. This might take me 5 minutes to mix, 5 to 10 minutes to trowel on, and then quickly flatten it with the trowel without worrying about getting the lines or the trowel marks out. I've seen lots of plasterers using these wide bead skim tools, which are great for bigger areas and ceilings, but I've always just used my trowel. So we're into 20 minutes now, and it's time to mix our second coat, another 1/4 bag and our remaining 3 litres of water. Trowel the second coat, much the same as before. The total thickness for both coats should be an absolute minimum of 2 millimeters, but really you want to be around about 3 millimeters. The first coat of skim should be firming up by now, so this coat should go over easier, and use the corners as your starting point and really press in with the edge of the trowel, square with the edge and move outwards at the same time. Focus on the edges and then getting the plaster even on the wall, but you must get it on consistently and within this time window of around 10 to 15 minutes, since now the plaster is reacting with the air and beginning to change in its spreadable nature. Now let's go over it and flatten it again, and here you would use your speed skim if you had one again. It doesn't matter about it not being smooth, there will still be trowel edges, and we'll sort that later. And with any time left over, which I do here since it's a very small area of wall we're doing, I'll use this time to scrape off the still wet plaster from the floor which I've dropped, sweep and generally clean up to make it easier for me at the end. Now the plaster is ready to begin to create that super flat finish we need, and this stage is called closing in. I used to use this stage using the trowel, but I found that using a sponge and lightly twirling around whilst the plaster is still alive is the best way for a self-builder guy like me. Here you can see the way I've sponged the wall, and as I'm doing it I'm adding a little bit of water spray, really sparingly. It just brings the plaster back to life enough to get the sponge to get it spread even and way quicker than I'm able to using a trowel. Now for a little area of wall like this, I might not always bother with a sponge, but I'm showing you how here for the larger areas and for ceilings where you'll find it's a huge help in getting the spread even, especially on ceilings where it's pretty tiring and stressful as your arm starts to ache whilst that clock is ticking and the time becomes your enemy. Keep some clean wet snots of plaster for filling in any blemishes on the wall for the next stage, and we're nearing our smoothing and polishing stage. Now we're getting to the bit where you start to see the end game, the first trowel to smooth. If you're sponging the way I did, you shouldn't need water, but you'll know as you begin your troweling motion, same as before, using your edges to start you off left to right, top and then up from bottom in smooth, crisp movements. You'll hopefully start to instinctively feel how to firmly press and the speed to move. I'm using gloves and the plaster badly reacts to my skin, but it's much better with your bare hands for a better feel if you can. So now it's a second trowel, same as before. Have a really good quality 1.5 to 2 inch brush. Don't buy one of these cheapo brushes. The bristles will end up on the wall and it ruins the plaster as you try to take them out with your fingernails. And here's where the plasterers have the time to enjoy their cup of tea and listen to Popmaster on Radio 2, since they're way faster. Whilst I'm happy to continue using the Marshalltown for this stage, you can also use a finishing trowel such as this lovely Nella 16 inch. Is it Nella or Naila? If I'm doing a larger area where I'm worried about my time, I might use this bigger finishing trowel. Final trowel to semi-matte finish, and some call this polishing, trying to use less water and really focus on getting my edges super sharp and straight. You can use the brush sparingly along these edges, which I think stops the junction with the dry edges, drying out the new skim too quickly, but you really want to lubricate everything with the minimal amount of water here. I'll avoid polishing too much. I don't really care about getting that super shiny finish. I want a decent key for my mist coat, which I myself will be putting on with a roller. So a matte finish to my plaster with a little bit of friction is what I'm looking for. Here's the wall completed. It's hard to film it to show the flatness, but it is there. What's also there is a lot of discolor, which is fine for a beginner. Don't confuse this with what they call tiger stripes, which are uneven marks where too much water was used too early, or uneven trowel work which has created scores which makes the stripes. I'm certainly guilty of adding a little water at the sponge stage and we get these pinky areas of discoloration as a result, but you're painting over it and so who cares. Here's the finished wall, and I'll make some further videos showing how I tackled all these awkward areas for this attic conversion using bonding plaster, which is actually pretty easy to use compared to multi-finish. And if you've got some small projects, house renovations where you're demolishing a wall or adding some sockets, I'll talk you through that as well. So have a look at that video. So please subscribe for more, and please hit me a thumbs up. It really does help me. And keep in mind, I'm no plasterer, and I'm sure there'll be some comments about where I've got it wrong. This is the overview you'll need to decide whether you want to tackle your own skim and plaster projects. Thanks for watching, and I really hope to see you in the next one.